In this video, we are going to go over Bondtech's EnVision Control software recipe and sequence editor. We are going to utilize a single part TC autoclave system with simple I/O management. We begin by clicking the recipe editor. We will bring up the unit, which is this one particular autoclave. This first page allows you to load or start any type of sequence or recipe that you have already created. The second page under the Maintenance tab shows you the current running location of the particular recipe that is loaded into memory. The last page, the Engineering tab, is where you go to design or build your recipe. It will include the equipment configuration for your particular machine and the ability to name the machine, the unit number, save the recipe, edit the current recipe, or edit and control a master recipe that's already been created. Clicking this button will allow us to edit the current recipe, which in this case has not been configured. On the top, we can see where we can add a recipe name, a version number, author, version date, and product code. We can also choose to allow this recipe to go into a long hold or an unlimited time hold if it ever did encounter a fault. Faults can be defined per steps or per equipment, and you will see those later on. The first step is to define what steps you're going to take. They can be done in one of two ways. We can click on this here and define that this is our starting step to initialize all the equipment. If you hover over, you will see that step 0 is to start. Step 1 has yet to be defined. We can also go define all the steps before we continue on with the recipe. In this particular recipe, we're going to heat our product up to 150 degrees. Then we're going to heat up to 350 degrees. Then we will cool back down to 150 degrees. Finally, vent any pressure, and then we will end our process. Each step, or better yet, each recipe needs to have a start and end, which initializes and then closes all the equipment back to normal operating. Once that's defined, we can go back and hover over each of these and we will see what we just wrote previously. In continuing with editing, I have filled in the top information so we can see that later on. We're going to go ahead and start with step 1, which is to heat up to 150 degrees. In this particular step, we want to pressure up our system. We're going to activate vacuum control, set the parameter to 45 psi at a rate of 5 psi per minute. While that's going on, we're going to activate the heater, have a set point of 150 degrees at 4 degrees per minute, and down here you have the choice of whether you would like to use the part thermocouple or the air thermocouple, and if there are availability of a leading and lagging, which of those you would choose. This particular one is a small autoclave, so we're going to use the air thermocouple leading. As you can see, these green dots have shown up to say that this step or this piece of equipment is utilized in this step. We are also going to make sure that the vacuum system is turned on and running. The next step is to continue the heating cycle. We are going to continue heating with our heater up to 350 degrees at the same rate, 4 degrees per minute, and we are going to be utilizing the leading part TC. In this particular recipe, While it's heating up, as long as we are above 45 psi in pressure, I no longer need the vacuum pump. I'm going to go ahead and activate this system and disable the vacuum pump, which will turn it off. I am also going to open up the block valves so that it can vent any pressure back out that is being applied by the system. Now, once we are up to 350 degrees, this step will move to step number 3. In this step, where we previously defined cool to 150, I think I want to change that to where this particular part gets held for 30 minutes. This step timer allows you to input a time or a hold time for this particular step. Note that this value is in milliseconds, so we're going to, for 30 minutes, enter 1.8 million milliseconds. We also want to make sure that during this hold time, we continue to hold the temperature that was previously defined. Once this timer has run through this step, it will continue to this step, in which we will want to change this and update it to cool down. The final step is to cool down and depressurize. We're going to define step 4 to use the cooling system. We'll turn it on, set our set point of 150 degrees at 5 degrees a minute. The last step, we'll want to depressurize the system. Turn on depressurization. Go to 0 psi at 5 psi per minute. If you'll notice, right here, maximum is set to 5. This is defined in the equipment phase of what the maximum ramp rates you would like to have for any of your recipes. This can be adjusted on site by any engineer. If we go to one of these steps, let's choose step 3. Better yet, let's choose step 2, and we click on to hold it. This step does highlight which systems you're using. You're going to be utilizing the vacuum system, vacuum release, and the heat up. This is just another way to check on what you're doing in this particular step. To save this recipe as a master, we will now close the sequencer, then save this current sequence as a master recipe. We're going to choose the next one that's available. Now if we go home, we will see the recipe that we just created. Test composite, product code, version, date, and author. We can also load, before we were to start, another master recipe that shows the same information for that one. Let's go back to the one we just created. While we're running, we can start here, and the displays will show up on the back and on the top of what recipe we're running and what step. However, I want to be a little more interactive and see what's going on while this recipe is running. So I'm going to display the full runtime window while we're running. This can show you what's going on through each step as we go through the steps. There are multiple pages for longer recipes and longer step sequences, and you can also set any of these sequences to pause at the next designated pause point. Pause points are defined in your recipe setup.